Hi dear viewers. Today I'm joining a conversation with Kathryn Garten, the author of America Revival, The Forgotten Man and Woman. It's quite a pleasure and a joy to have Kathryn on the show today. How are you doing, Kathryn?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing very fine too. It's lovely to eventually have you on the show, considering the initial, Zoom connectivity.
Well, I appreciate that you wanted to interview me and talk to me about my book and the reason why I wrote it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, really. It's lovely. Thank you. Thank you for coming on, actually. Yeah.
Thank you. I
Yeah.
do.
So, Katin, I want to first say that reading through the description page of your book, America Revival, The Forgotten Man and Woman, sounds quite beautiful and lovely to me. And I would like to ask you, how does this book come about? What inspired you to write America Revival? And how do you come about the title itself, the title name?
Well, there were three reasons why I wrote this book. One of them was I was in prison
Oh.
and I had no control over what my thoughts of what was going on in the country. Actually,
Mm,
I wasn't even aware of what was going on at all because I was in prison. And
wow.
I spoke to my mother one day on the phone, and she told me something. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "You haven't heard, you haven't seen, where have you been?" And the minute she
Oh.
said, "Where have you been?" I was like, that question was like, "Where do you think I am? I'm in prison. I don't have any control over what's going on, or I don't get to see what other people get to see because
Mm,
we um, were controlled by everything. We couldn't think for ourselves. We couldn't do for ourselves. It was just a situation where you were dependent
mm,
on the people who were responsible for having you there. So
mm.
she told me, I told her, okay, I don't understand. And she said, well, it's working so that people can start thinking about how much they want their country to stay free
Mm,
and to have faith and to believe in family. So those three things, faith, family, and freedom, were the three reasons why I decided to sit down and write this
wow.
book. And it took me 7 years because
Wow.
being sentenced in prison, you don't have very much that you can provide or that
Mm,
you can give input for. So I used to sit in the break room and watch the news. I watched it 24/7, all different shows. And the one thing I noticed about the situation was that
yeah.
in 2016, things were starting to change and they weren't
Oh.
changing for the better. And I was getting frustrated to the point where I needed to do something, but I didn't know what to do. So when
Mm,
I first started writing, I actually wrote poems. And poems to me were beautiful statements that um, rhymed together. So when I started writing these poems, they were more
mm.
like modern day. They were more like modern day psalms. They were long, but
Oh.
they had meaning and purpose. And so I decided that if I could write poems, I could write books. So
Wow.
this book was not my first. This book was not my first book. Okay, this
Wow.
book came about because of my frustration for what was going on in the country, the divisiveness, the just the overall attitude of how people were hating each other, and it
Mm,
didn't make any sense to me. I was in a place, okay, where I was the minority, okay,
mm. Yeah.
and all different cultures, all different races, okay, were in there with me. All right.
Mm,
I came from a um, typical Long Island family, enough, to feel comfortable. right?
Yeah.
And to feel as though I was doing the right thing by them, right? But
Mm,
as I grew up, I realized that if we wanted to get involved in our lives, we had to get involved in other
people's
people's lives
lives.
as well.
Absolutely.
Understand their cultures, their religions, why they thought the way they did.
Mm,
And I've always wanted to write, but I was always afraid to write because I didn't think that anyone cared what I had to say. So
mm,
I didn't try. But I was also very, very busy raising two kids and having a home and a business and everything else. It was my
mm.
time. So when I went to prison, at
Yeah.
first I was at first I was obsessed by my case. For a whole year, I was completely obsessed because
Mm,
I felt that I wasn't being taken seriously and that my case, I was railroaded basically by my case. And so, being a paralegal, I decided that I was going to look into it and basically break it down and see what was going on with it. So I got
mm,
obsessed by it. But God came into my life and said, "You can't do this anymore.
mm,
You've got to start thinking about where you are and the present situation." And He gave me this talent and He told me to use this talent for purpose. So when I first started writing, it was divine intervention because I never wrote poems before in my life. Okay,
mm.
so far to this day, I've written over 500 poems, but I've
Wow.
never written
That's,
them ever.
yeah.
So one night I went to sleep and I couldn't sleep. God wouldn't let me
Oh.
sleep. He wouldn't let me sleep for days. And finally, all these things that were going on in my head, I sat down and wrote something. And right after I wrote something, I was able to have a solid 8 hours sleep. And then I didn't even know what I had written because I just wrote what was in my head. So my
Mm,
bunkie said to me, "What is this?" I said, "I just wrote it, it just came into my head." So this is really good. And then all of a sudden, Peter, all of
yeah.
these poems started flowing like a fountain out of my hands.
It happens, you know.
And I
Yeah.
think that good. So I sent them to my mother. And my
Mm,
mother, she read them and she goes, "These are really good. I want you to publish them." I said, "I'm
wow.
not going to publish. I don't know how to publish." So she used her last $700 that she had and she
Mm,
found me a publisher. And that publisher wanted to publish a book of poems. And the name of the book was called Faith, A Walk Through the Human Spirit.
wow.
And all of these poems were about everything. They were transcended everything. And people would read them and they'd cry and they'd laugh. All kinds of emotions were coming out of them. But the book never got published. And
Mm,
I got really frustrated about that. And then something happened that turned my life completely around. My mother passed.
wow.
And she was a miracle. She was a miracle. And she was the reason why I decided to sit down and write America's Revival because my family, my parents taught me about faith and God and family and freedom. And here I was in prison, had lost my freedom, but I hadn't lost my faith and I
Mm,
hadn't lost my family. And I didn't want anybody else to start doing that too. So
mm,
I remembered what happened between 2008 and 2012 and how gasoline was so expensive and foreclosures was 75% increase, and people were not doing well. So I decided that I would bring people back to that time and ask them, how do you feel now? Do you want to go forward? Do you want to go backward? So
mm,
that's why I wrote the book. I wanted people to start reflecting on what was going on in 2016 versus 2012. I wasn't in prison in 2012, but when I was in prison, it was 2013 to 2000. 23. That was
Wow.
a long time. A lot of things happened. But the one thing that happened was that people were starting to not care about each other anymore and not believe in this country and not want to fight for the reasons why the people before us fought and died in wars and learning how to survive through every single catastrophe and trial and tribulation that was in our lives. And the one thing that it came back to me was the word of God was center. And I needed to bring that out in a more modern way so people would understand. So I started reading the Bible religiously. And the one
Mm,
thing I came up with was the conversion of Saul to Paul. That if a man like that could turn into somebody that Jesus could use as an instrument, then somebody in this modern day could be the same way. And that's why I wrote the book surrounded by the 2016 election,
wow.
because I didn't like what was going on in this country.
Yeah, that's quite amazing to know, really. I love your take on this. I love your amazing description and how, America Revival came to be. That's quite lovely to know. Yeah, so following on from America Revival, was your life affected by a decade in federal prison? How did this change you as a person?
It humbled me
Wow.
extremely. I was one of those people who thought I could do anything, you know, and I believe that arrogance was probably one of the things that got me a long sentence because
Mm,
um, I wanted to fight my case and I didn't want to accept a plea, even though I was not offered one. It's just that it seemed that it was my attitude before I went to prison that changed. Um, I see more for people than I do for myself. I
mm,
love more for people than I do for myself.
wow.
I write for people more than I do for myself.
Wow.
Um, and I want all of my writings, everything I do, to be partially donated to marginalized groups because
Mm,
that's why I do it. I want people to start getting better lives, especially the ones who can't do it on their own.
mm,
I've lost so much. I lost a lot of years. I lost my daughter while I was in prison. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to her. She was a very giving person. She gave everything she had to everybody. And I wanted to carry on that legacy for her so that I felt that she was still here on this earth doing what God purposed her to do. So I kind of like picked up the torch of both my mother and my daughter. And I feel better about it because I don't live for myself anymore. I live for others and I live for the purpose of
mm,
what God wanted me to be here for.
wow. Wow, that's quite pulling, really. That's very pulling, and it's quite amazing to know that it humbled you, really. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, just in case for readers who haven't read the book yet, and without giving much information away, because I know you've talked about it initially when we first started, could we also have a sneak of what we'd expect in terms of themes, picking up America Revival?
The idea of America revival is just that. America has to be revived. It has to,
Hmm.
the American position of how we are looking on the world stage is not good. And it was a very good picture, except for the fact that we all encountered a plague that mostly destroyed this world, but it didn't destroy America because we were prepared for it because we had somebody who was a leader for us that prepared us. Even though we didn't know it was coming,
Hmm.
he still prepared us. And I believe that God prepared him to help us. And therefore, this nation is going to be a better off nation when people believe that we are here for God's purpose and not for our own.
That's quite lovely to know, really. Thank you. Thank you for writing. And again, I would love to ask you, Katie, why is writing a passion for you? Following on from your imprisonment to your liberation, why is writing a passion for you? Why do you feel that you need to tell the story? Yeah, maybe I should put it that way. Would you love to talk about that?
God gives us trials and tribulations for us to have testimonials. And without
Hmm.
tests, we don't have testimonials. We can't tell people our story. Everybody has a unique story. We can't tell people our story. And what I wanted to do was to tell my story, but in different ways, because I didn't want to do it in a biographical way. Like I said,
Hmm.
I wanted humbled in the situation. So I wrote it in novels. All of my novels have an air of factual
Reality.
function to them because my children's characters are in there, um, and their personalities, and it made me and kept me closer to my family and to the reason and the purpose that I began to write. I read about, I don't know, 4,000 books while I was in prison. And
Wow.
that's why I decided to write, because I finally got rid of
Wow.
the fear. I read those books and I said, oh, wow, if they can do it, I can do it too. And I started
Wow.
understanding the formats because by reading over and over and over, you basically get the gist of what and how it's being written and why. And also, there's an attitude in life in this world and in our lives now that people don't spend the time to read and learn about other cultures and other places. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
being in prison, sometimes your only friend is a book.
Hmm.
And depending on what book you're reading. And when I started reading the Bible through, I started realizing it's not just a book about something that happened in 2,000, 3,000 years ago. It's about history, it's about our history, it's about how we have evolved and how we should continue to keep evolving. Because even though AI is on the forefront, it can't be it can't give love, it can't show compassion, it
Hmm.
can't give us the one thing that God wanted us to have, which was
Absolutely.
understanding relationships.
Yeah.
The most important relationship is a relationship we have with God, and how
Hmm.
our relationships of family and friends and business and even strangers, they're all relationships and we all have to learn from them. We stop
Hmm.
learning, we stop growing, there's no more that we can do for each other because we all think that we're independent of everything, and we're not. We're dependent on the one true power that basically controls everything. And we finally have to say we have to be content in our circumstances, and we have
Hmm.
to purpose in our talents that God gives us.
Yeah. That's actually amazing to know, really. I mean, reading 4,000 books, it's enough to reshape, you and spike up the writer in you. And that's a lot of books, really. That's beautiful. I mean, that's very wholesome.
Three things in prison that you can do: you can read, you can write, and you can sleep. And I hardly ever slept. And after the reading, why not write?
That's actually amazing to know, really. And that actually got me remembered. One of the prominent writers we have in Nigeria, and I think the first Nobel laureate in Africa, Professor Wole Soyinka. Most of his amazing works were written when he was in prison. I think it was put in prison for speaking against the Nigerian government, and he was trying to be a human activist, speaking against the military government, blah blah blah, blah, etc. Then he was imprisoned. Then most of his other works, so many of his interesting works were bet out during his days in the prison. It's a time for you to sit down, reflect. There is no distraction.
Correct.
There's no
Yeah.
movement whatsoever. It's all by your own. You can come up and start. So most of his beautiful works, the man died. And I think so many of them, I've forgotten the titles, were written when he was in prison. And they're very great literature work that when he came out of the prison, earned him an amazing recognition and so many sales actually. Yeah, so I can relate to that. That's quite beautiful to mention. Thank you for mentioning.
I think that a lot of people, when they're in prison, they take it in a negative way. I
Hmm,
decided to take it in a positive way.
absolutely.
I made use of my time. I reflected. Like I said, I lost a lot, but I gained something that was most important, and that was my understanding of who God wanted me to be and what He wanted me to do. And
Hmm.
I thank Him because I was released until after 2024, but I was released early. And at the same time, there's a lot of people there. My friends are still there. And I want
Oh.
to give a to those who can't be heard because they're between concrete walls and steel doors.
Hmm. Wow.
So I
Wow.
want to
And
support the incarcerated writer too.
that's actually very pulling. And yeah, I remember one of his other titles, Prison Notes, and quite a lot of other ones. Thank you for mentioning. I love the sound of this. Now, apart from America Reviver, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on?
Oh, yes. See, I did a lot of writing. I wrote 30 full manuscripts and
Wow.
hope to publish them um, all soon. That's why the hardest thing about writing in prison is you can't get a literary agent because they don't want you to be in prison while they're representing you because you can't do book tours and you can't do book signings and you can't be available for when they set up schedules
Hmm.
for you. So
Yeah.
I have been fervently looking for a literary agent. And I know that having a literary agent would be a good thing because once you're known as a writer, then you can be a self published writer because then people
Yeah.
know who you are and your name will sell your books. But until they know who
Absolutely.
you are, you have to be of a traditional sense too. So I see
Yeah.
myself as a hybrid because I like self publishing. I think that it gives you more control over your body of work and how you're going to um, allow it to reflect on you and inspire those who read it.
Hmm.
Because when you're writing for yourself, nobody's standing over your shoulder saying, "Oh no, cut that out. Oh no, cut that out. Oh no, cut that out. That doesn't work." That's it. No. When a
Hmm.
writer writes, they write for a tone, and that tone has to be kept intact. Otherwise, the
Yeah.
book isn't going to lose its effect.
Yeah. Wow.
Because
I
the
love that
purpose.
statement. Yeah. Yeah, I love that statement. That's quite pulling and very true. Thank you for mentioning. Thank you. Now, could you tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? Are there any challenges you've encountered in the process of writing your book and also ever since it got published?
I I went through a lot of different stages, but again, when I had a problem, when I ran into a block, I just prayed, and the answer was given to me. Like my first
Wow.
book, this is not my first book. My first book is a novel, and it's a legal romantic thriller, and it's
Wow.
the first one was published by basically a miracle because A, I didn't have any money. B, I wasn't able to make a manuscript for a publisher because we didn't have Word or um, any kind of software in prison that we could use to make
Hmm.
a manuscript that would be acceptable to a publisher. So I got really frustrated one day And I just said, God, you know, I'd like to be able to publish my manuscript because when my mom died, it was the one thing that she wanted me to do. So I said a prayer, and then the next day I went on to my core links, and there, right there in front of me, was an email. If you are an incarcerated person and you want to write and you want to publish, please get in touch with us and send us an email. So I did, and they got in touch with me and they said, yes, we would like to print, um, publish your book. So they gave me certain requirements necessary to do that. And then I
Mm.
got defeated because I couldn't meet those requirements. And they wanted me to pay a fee to do a word perfect manuscript. I couldn't do that. I didn't have the money.
Oh.
So I got defeated. And one day, a woman came to prison. She was sentenced to our facility, and I met her. Um, I sang in the choir, and she came to church and she met me. And she asked me if she could sing with me, and I said yes. We became friends. And
Oh.
a little while later, I told her about my writings, and she told me, okay, let me read one. So I gave her the book that I wanted published, but I couldn't do it. So she took it, and I said, but I can't get it published. And she said, why? And I said, because I don't have the money to make up the manuscript for the word perfect so that they can publish it. So she said, you know what? I have an office. She called her office, and she got every one of her people to drop what they were doing. We sent the manuscript over. They put it together. They sent it to the publisher, and the book a
Wow.
year later was published.
Wow.
That
That's
was,
amazing.
yeah, and that's in my other book. I have another one called Angels Aren't Just for Kids,
Mm.
and that's basically about all the amazing experiences that I've had in life that I can't explain except for
Mm.
by divine intervention. That's why I call it Angels Aren't Just for Kids. And then I have other stuff like um, I learned a lot about street literature in prison and urban
Mm.
books. So I wrote a couple of series of those. One is called Traffic Jam, and it went viral on YouTube and TikTok. My friend
Oh.
got out of prison. She took a copy of it with her, and she made a video. And she told me, "Oh my gosh, you should see! Everybody loves your book." And I was like, "What?" In fact, there was a producer who made a comment that he wanted to make a movie of it. So
Wow.
when I got out, I said, I'm going to have that published too. And that was a series. Most of my books are series because, like I said, I read 4,000 books, and a lot of
Wow.
the books I read showed me that series are very, very popular books. You go
Hmm.
from, and they want to see what happens in the next one, the next one, the
Absolutely.
next
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. 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 That's
It's
quite
more,
lovely.
it's more profitable for a publisher to buy a book of an author if it's going to continue to go on.
Yeah. That's beautiful, and
So
that's very true. Thank you for
commercial,
mentioning.
there's a lot of ideas that have to do with book
Yeah.
writing is a business, a multi-billion dollar business. And
Absolutely.
you have to look at it that way too. If you don't look at it that way, then you're never going to sell your books because publishers have to make money, and that's why they bring an author into their house because
Mm.
they're going to make. So a book, one book is good, but two, three, four, five from the same from the same author, the publisher is going to want that author to be
Yeah.
in their house.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning. And this sounds like an amazing advice, actually, upcoming writers and publishers and authors, actually, out there. Thank you. Now, before we wrap it up today, is there anything that you'd love to share with the viewers about your book that we did not mention in this interview and you'd love the viewers to know?
Yes, in my book, where oh, here in my book, at the end of the book,
Yeah.
okay,
Just show it to the camera
15,
again if you have a copy there. Love you to show it to the camera.
I have 18 poems in the back of this book, okay,
Oh,
and I wanted people to see that I could write poetry too. So I have this one poem. and I thought it was a pretty good. I thought it was a pretty good poem. It's also a little funny, so I just want to read it. It's
Yeah.
called Lockdown. Locked down in our cell for 190 days, but 24/7. Okay, and this was because of the COVID at the same time.
Yeah.
So this was written in 2020. So I wrote this dedicated to all those incarcerated persons who have been locked down 24/7 for 190 days. And I wrote this, it's called Lockdown. And this is poem number 16 in the book. There are 18 poems. And this one says, your idea of lockdown is not my idea of lockdown. Let's look after the facts here. The place you're confined is spacious. The place I'm confined is small, can hardly walk a few feet. The place you're in, the lock was engaged by you. The place I'm in, the lock is something I don't voluntarily undo. The door that's closed behind you at night is turned by your hands. The door that's slammed closed and 1,000 pounds of steel behind me is secured by the man. I can't just turn the knob and walk outside like you can. Maybe that's what you're allowed to do, but I'm stuck until they decide to open the door. What's more, you get the time you choose. I get an hour out of 24/7 to go free, not at my sea. I have not had fresh air and sunshine for more than 100 days. You have many ways to get out in the fresh air, sunshine, take the dog for a walk. I have no companion like this for a friend. My days are confined with a small piece of glass to tell me whether it's day or night. You still get to go out to the store, 7-Eleven, and maybe a drive-through window for a cheeseburger and fries, too, at McDonald's, yummy in my tummy. The best fries to buy in the world, bar none, at least the only one I'll ever recommend to a friend. So until you are confined to an 8x10 space for 24/7 like me, and someone always in your face breathing down your neck, what the heck? Don't tell me you're in a state of lockdown. Hey, no way. I'll trade places with you any day.
Wow. Wow, that's quite pulling and that's quite interesting actually to read. I'm kind of curious how that come to be, but that's quite beautiful. Thank you for reciting.
Well, there are 18 poems in the back of this book. So people who like poetry can
Yeah.
just read the poems, and people who like a book that shows the changes that America has gone through from being a divisive country to
Yeah.
hopefully having some kind of revival of faith, family, and freedom should read this book. It's a must read. It's a must read now. That's why I published it. It's a now book. It's not for tomorrow. It's not for a year ago. It's for now.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's now is people have to start thinking and they have to start waking up. That's why it's called America's Revival.
Great.
It's a wake up book.
Yeah, and on what platform is it available on for purchase? Just in case we have some viewers who are currently watching and would love to get a copy of it. What platform is it available on for purchase?
It's on Amazon under America's Revival by Kathryn Garten.
That's great. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy. You get a copy of the book directly on Amazon and also on other platform. So thank you so much. So thank you so much, Kathryn, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. It's awesome having this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope that we can do this again.
Absolutely, that'll be fun. Thank you so much. This was quite fun doing.